Okay, so in our last presentation, we talked about externalities and how they have the potential to have a market mess up and not get to MSB equals MSC. Now, if people can privately bargain and there's low transactions costs, people are reasonable, then it's possible that the Coase theorem finds a way out of this problem. But in reality, lots of times transaction costs are not very low, people aren't reasonable, and it's incredibly difficult to actually get decent information about costs and benefits to be shared across lots of folks. So let's talk about ways in which the government can take an active role in correcting market failures. And I'm going to highlight the most popular one for you, which is Pigovian taxes and subsidies. In essence, the government's going to impose a tax to fix negative externalities, and they're going to impose a subsidy to fix positive externalities. Okay, let's jump in. For those of you who are keeping track here, this is chapter 5, and this will be part 2. Okay, so with a negative externality, we know that the problem that we have is that the marginal costs are not indicative of the overall social cost that society is going to experience. So you've got to add on your external costs on top of your private marginal costs in order to reach a marginal social cost that's actually reflective of what the real costs are for any individual unit of output. Now let's assume that there's no positive externality, so our demand curve actually is going to be just fine. It will be a reflection of our marginal social benefit in this case, because there is no positive externality, no adjustments needed. Now, if individual buyers and sellers were to act on their own private marginal costs and marginal benefits, then they're going to end up at an equilibrium. And this equilibrium would be represented by the intersection of supply and demand, just like we've seen in so many chapters before. This is what we're going to refer to as Q market. Q market has got a problem because Q market is essentially going to produce a benefit which is much smaller than the social costs of creating that same unit of output. So if MSC is bigger than MSB, this is no good for us. This is an inefficient outcome, and your textbook has been describing this triangle here in yellow as a dead weight loss. In essence, every single unit beyond the intersection of MSC and MSB shouldn't have been made. They all had higher marginal social costs than marginal social benefits. The trick here then, of course, is that we want to get to MSC equaling MSB. This is our golden rule. Well, that occurs here. And we would like to produce this optimal level of output, this efficient level of output. But the question is, how do we get that to happen? In order to get that to happen, we need to make sure that people are actually using or producing, consuming less of whatever this object is. Okay, let me give you an example at this point. We might be talking about livestock. And livestock, as we're out there buying and selling livestock and keeping them, they actually are very, very flatulent. They fart a lot. And it seems like a silly problem to have, but it's stinky, it's gross for those that are around them. And perhaps more importantly, that fart is essentially methane. It is a gas which is incredibly bad from a greenhouse gas perspective. It traps all kinds of heat. So it's going to exacerbate our already ongoing issues with global warming and climate change. So really we need to get the amount of livestock down from Q market to Q optimal. And how might we do that? Well, I already sort of gave it away, but a Pigovian tax is going to be implemented, and this tax is going to be equal to the spillover cost, or the negative externality. So if you set a tax equal to this spillover damage here, then what you end up with is you drive up the price for consumers compared to the old equilibrium, and you drive down the price for producers compared to the old equilibrium. Of course, higher producer or higher consumer prices means they'll want less of the object, and lower producer take-home prices mean that they're going to want to produce less. Of course, that was our whole point, right? We were trying to make sure that we got down here to this Q optimal. By imposing a tax, we essentially force the market to an efficient level of output where MSC is actually going to be equal to MSB. That's how you could use a tax to fix a negative externality. Okay, so what happens when we've got a positive externality? Well, with a positive externality, we've got the opposite problem. We've essentially got an inefficiently low level of output if you leave the market to its own devices. So with a positive externality, whatever we're talking about here, let's say that it's pertussis vaccinations, whooping cough you might know it as. Pertussis vaccinations have a spillover benefit because whenever anyone goes out and gets one, they're not going to get whooping cough, and people around them are also not going to get whooping cough. So we're going to need to raise up our MSB by the added benefit of any of these units of output to society. Now, we'll assume there are no negative spillover costs, and essentially our supply curve, or our marginal cost curve, is actually going to be equal to marginal social costs here. If there are no spillover benefits, there's no adjustment that needs to be made. Now, the market by itself is going to go to where supply equals demand, and that is going to produce Q market, and it'll give us our original equilibrium price. This is woefully inadequate though, because of course at this quantity we can see that what we've produced here is, this is our marginal social cost, but it is actually much smaller than our marginal social benefit. So the last pertussis vaccination that was sold had a much higher MSB than it did an MSC. This, of course, is also no good for us and inefficient. Your textbook has been talking about this area here as essentially inefficient outcome or dead weight loss. It's basically an area that we should be grabbing for consumers and producers, because between this Q market and where we're going to want to end up, which is our Q optimal, all of these units had higher MSBs than MSCs. In other words, we should have kept going. We should have kept creating more pertussis vaccinations, and we would have found that we were actually becoming more and more efficient. So how do we do that? This is going to require you to think a little bit outside of the box, but hopefully not too far. What I'm going to want you to do is think about a subsidy as essentially a negative tax. Instead of the government taking money out, the government is actually offering to put money in. So if you buy something, they may give money to the producer, or they may give money to the consumer. And of course, in order to get any more output created, they're going to have to share that money, because you have to find both willing buyers and sellers. Point being though, is you can use the same kind of wedge analysis. You've just got to put the wedge on the other side of your equilibrium. So you're going to impose a subsidy that's equal to your external benefit or your spillover. In other words, you're going to offer a subsidy that's equal to the spillover benefit generated from the vaccinations. Once you do this, of course, what this means is, coming off of our original supply curve, we know that this is the price the producer is going to get to take home now, and the bottom part of our wedge is going to give us the price the consumer is going to actually end up paying now after the subsidy. Mind you, this is the exact opposite of a tax because, of course, the money is going in rather than coming out, which is why PP, or the price of the producer, comes off the top of a wedge for a subsidy, and the consumer's price comes off of the bottom. In any event, what you can see is that as the price to the producer rises, they of course are going to be interested in bumping up quantity, and as the cost of vaccinations lowers for consumers, they are also going to be interested in purchasing more quantity. That's what's going to get us from Q market to Q optimal. And with our subsidy set at the level of the spillover benefit, this is going to push us right out to the spot where MSC is equal to MSB. I'm going to circle that in red right here. We're going to get to this intersection right there. And we're efficient. Yay, right? MSC equals MSB. The last vaccination produced social benefits equal to the social costs on the margin. Okay, there you have it. Two different examples, one a negative and one a positive externality. You can essentially fix them by imposing a tax or a subsidy. Taxes for negative externalities, because negative externalities are generally overproduced, so we need to knock the quantity down to the efficient level. And subsidies for positive externalities, because positive externalities are underproduced, and we need to goose the quantity up to the efficient amount. Okay, hopefully that does it for you. Let me know if you have questions. In our third installment, we'll take up public goods and common resources, another common instance of market failure.